uh, our guests are already. Our audience is with us. This is Wehle, Simple Politics. I want to invite and welcome again Elliot Williams, CNN legal analyst. I was just telling our audience that you not only have prosecutorial experience, you at DOJ, but also worked on the legislative side for Senator Schumer.
Yep.
And what, as you know, what I like to do in the show is just break stuff down for people. So can you walk us through what is incitement of insurrection? What is that? And just so people know, that's what's being charged. But what does that mean? And how is what's happening now different from what a prosecutor might do in a court?
Okay, well, the biggest question, let's start with the second question first. What's different about, is this a prosecution or not? This is not a criminal proceeding. And you hear a lot of, we are obsessed in the world today with criminality. Is it a crime? Is it not? And not all things that are going to be impeachable, not all things that one can get in trouble for are going to be crimes, right? And the standard being used at the impeachment proceeding starting tomorrow, won't be the reasonable doubt standard, right? Like, you know, you hear the words, guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. It's a very, very high bar for evidence that prosecutors have to meet. That's just not what needs to happen here. What needs to happen is just that the Senate needs to demonstrate that the president committed this act. Now, to your first question, incitement of insurrection. Incitement is this interesting thing in the law where someone's, and I'm not going to get the precise language right off the top of my head, but it's where words spoken by one person wind up people sufficiently that they commit a crime or an offense. So here it's, did the president, both in his speech on January 6th prior to the acts of insurrection, but also in the run-up to the riot. So for instance, if you read the House manager's brief, they say that this isn't just about one speech Donald Trump gave, but a pattern of conduct stretching back to summer of 2020, where he's spending a lot of energy undermining the election results and ultimately whipping people up to the point that they willfully committed these acts of insurrection. So just to put it in a sentence, incitement is getting people excited to the point that they commit a criminal offense or some other wrong.
So that's a violation of federal and state criminal law. Mm-hmm. But we also have, and we're hearing a lot about, we have a First Amendment. So it can't be, listen, you had a really bad day, you got really stressed out, you made some statements that ended up causing violence, so we're going to put you in jail. Mm-hmm. So what do you say to people, and including the defense team here? Listen, the president was just exercising his First Amendment rights.
Oh, Lord.
Politicians, they cite some cases, they miscite some cases. They cite Justice Brennan as the actual majority opinion. It's kind of troubling, actually, as lawyers, that they got the wrong justice twice. But they cite some opinions that basically say, politicians have to talk about policy. And that's all Donald Trump was doing here. What's the answer to that, both legally and factually?
Yeah. Let's look at it a few different ways. Number one, even before you get to so assuming the First Amendment does apply, assuming the president does have free speech rights that are implicated here or so on, the president alone in the United States is governed by Article 2, Section 3 of the Constitution, which is what's called the Faithful Exercise Clause, or the Take Care Clause of the Constitution. The president is the only person in the United States who has a rule that applies to him or her one day, which is that he must take care that the laws of the United States are faithfully executed, right? There's no greater example of failing to take care that the laws are duly executed or that faithfully executed than spending several months ensuring that the laws are not faithfully executed. So
which law are you talking about, Elliot? Which law is not executed by Donald Trump?
Our federal election laws and multiple state laws. So for instance, the president on a number of occasions, number one, meddles in the Georgia state election process by contacting the Georgia Secretary of State and leaning on him. I need you to find 11,000 votes, which, the president poo-poos and says that, well, come on, I thought I actually won. And so if I thought I actually won, asking the Secretary of State to find 11,000 votes wasn't that. Oh, come on, that's nonsense. He calls Michigan Board of Elections members to lean on them and congratulate them for not voting to certify an election. And so it's clear that there is a pattern of undermining federal and state election law throughout this entire process. So that's the tension between the First Amendment and the take care clause in the Constitution. Beyond that, and this is more the common sense point as we get out of the legality, it cannot be the case that the First Amendment entitles anyone to do and say anything. The Supreme Court has made clear that you can't shout fire in a crowded theater. The Supreme Court makes clear, and the Constitution makes clear that I can't say to you, Kim Wehle, go outside right now, rob your neighbors, kill people, set your next door neighbor's house on fire. And then if you go do it and say, well, I was just Kim and I were just talking, So, it's the First Amendment doesn't act as a blanket. What's this term? It's the opposite of a prohibition, like a blanket license, right? Or protection for anyone to do and say whatever they want, whenever they want. And it's disingenuous for the president and his lawyers to attempt to make that argument, which they've been doing quite in all of their briefs.
Well, yeah, there's a couple things too. So people understand, as you indicate, the whole point of the Bill of Rights is to protect regular people against the big power of government. The president had the entire U.S. military and federal law enforcement apparatus at his fingertips. He is not in a position, Joe Biden now, to worry a ton about an overbearing executive branch enforcing laws unfairly vis-a-vis his speech. Right. That being said, we still have politicians who say stuff all the time. We can't run around, sort of prosecuting them, whether it's through impeachment or not. And I think we're inevitably going to see that blurring, right? In terms of people think of this as somehow criminally. So there is a burden in a way on the House impeachment managers to really treat this as if it's a criminal trial. Yeah. And that would include, I don't think the law is clear. I looked for the jury instructions. I couldn't find any for federal incitement, actually, because I think it's so rare. Probably under the Supreme Court, they have to show intent. Right. I think that is Donald Trump intended when he did speak on January 6th, which I think is really the critical moment for purposes of the insurrection, that he intended in those series of speeches and tweets to see the violence. Yeah. So it's interesting though. Yeah, it's interesting. And that's, that's going to be a tricky point, this whole intent prong. The president and his lawyers in his brief say you want to hold the president to a different standard than anybody else because he's president. And I would say that's precisely true. The president is the only role in government where one person holds it. This came up in the context of the special counsel investigation. This is a whole question as to why at least the Justice Department has found that you can't prosecute a sitting president because the president is a unitary figure, right? And so no one's saying that the president is held to less of a First Amendment standard, but the president's held to different standards than anybody else, and certainly any other figure in government. By way of example, the Supreme Court, you can ask one of those individuals to recuse themselves from a matter when they have a conflict of interest because there's 9 of them. Members of Congress can take themselves out of votes and so on. So this whole idea that the president is held to a lower standard is just not accurate. Now, on this intent question, number one, there is an entire body, like I said, of statements and conduct from the president stretching back to, I believe it's July 19th, 2020, where the president first says that he's not going to accept the results of the election. Then in December, that's when the whole be there, be wild statement started. And there were a number of statements pointing to an intent to, at least at a minimum, cause trouble at the Capitol, and at a maximum, cause open acts of insurrection. Now, the question is, are we holding the president, and should we hold the president to a standard of criminality? This gets back to this question of, could you convict him beyond a reasonable doubt? That may be challenging,
But the reasonable doubt standard doesn't apply here. And the standard is this conduct becoming A, of someone who holds the office of the presidency, or B, a former president who ought to be able to run for office again in the future? And the answer to those, based on the evidence that we have in the record on video right now, I think is a resounding, I don't remember if it's yes or no, but needless to say, he shouldn't be able to run for office again.
So just reading the Trump team's brief,
right?
I want to get to this question of proof, and you and I were just on CNN Sunday talking about this, and that is, they make the argument that the House impeachment manager's case so far, we don't know if there'll be witnesses called, is about cherry picking media bites. And of course, we have this running thread. You and I are both members of the media and lawyers and former government servants, and care a lot about the rule of law. But we have this thread that the media is biased, the media is against Donald Trump. So what do you? And I know you and I agree that there's ample evidence in terms of the videos. But what do you think about this question of not calling any witnesses, and does it play into the hands of their defense, which is, listen, this is one big long MSNBC clip. This is, and I was on C-SPAN this morning, and I had people from Republicans and Democrats calling in, but the Republicans really did think this is one big political attack on someone that the Democrats just haven't liked for a long time. Would a real trial, and I say real trial, the kind we see on TV with actual witnesses, would that maybe blunt that a little bit?
No, because unlike a real trial, and frankly, I said this on television this afternoon on CNN, unlike a real trial, this is the rare instance where the entire evidentiary record is now available on video, in tweet, and in other statements. So again, going back to the president's statements back in July on through the summer and fall, his tweets in December, the record of his statements on January 6th at the speech are all available to the public. Then when you click to the conduct that took place on the steps of the Capitol and the very statements of the people who were there, a number of whom, this is in the Washington Post this morning, saying, our president sent us here, our president wants us here, we are here on behalf of the president. And I think the most telling statement that I saw was one of the rioters saying, after the president gave his statements, like 3 hours into the riot, telling people to go home, saying, well, I'm going home because the president told me to go home. So, it's, yes, witnesses would be incredibly compelling. I think the single witness, who would be the most compelling is Officer Michael Fanone, who was the individual, the officer who was trapped in the door with people pushing on both sides, hearing people say, grab his own gun, kill him with his own gun, right? And certainly at a trial, that would be immensely compelling testimony about the terror and shock that this president caused by 6 months or however long it was of undermining results in the elections and in effect directing people to turn on their own government. But again, the Officer Fanone testimony, for instance, even if he doesn't testify, you have a video of the material of the transaction or the violence taking place. So, it's would it be great? Sure, but I don't think even the president's first impeachment, I don't think you have a prior case that I can think of where so much of the record exists already and people have seen it and senators have seen it.
Right. So a couple things that come to my mind around intent, which I'm kind of like hung up on because it is in the brief.
Right.
One would be some testimony from those who were around Donald Trump,
right,
in the White House and at the moment of the 6th. Maggie Haberman of New York Times has reported that they were saying, he was a monster.
Right.
There was some, reporting that he was happy about, actually, she might not have.
Delighted was the word, I think, yeah.
He was, delighted about it. So that shows some intent. That's one thing I would like to know about. Also, there's some reporting that the Trump campaign was involved both financially and in terms of their staff in organizing the January 6th rally. So a little bit of probing in that direction. And then the last piece would be, the lack of law enforcement. Because I'll say again, the Republican, I'd say across the board this morning, talking to, just so this is not a representative sample at all, but we're really upset about the lack of law enforcement. And so, Larry Hogan may be testifying, Maryland governor, to say, I sat there for 2 hours with my National Guard troops ready and waiting to go, but the Defense Department under Donald Trump wouldn't let me send them in to save the United States Congress.
Again, if it were a question of convicting an individual beyond a reasonable doubt, the intent prong would be hard to prove here. But that's always the case in criminal trials, where you have to prove that someone criminally intended, in violation of a statute, to effectuate some act or so on. What I would say is the materials that are already in the record do make clear and look, and lawyers all the time use circumstantial evidence to establish one's intent or the effects of one's actions. Now, on this point of people at the rally or at the riots spoke to this idea that they felt whipped up by the president. How does that go to the president's intent? It's still relevant and valid. Now, again, could you convict the president alone on the fact that there are people who heard his words and chose to act out? Not necessarily, but it's still relevant to establishing, the severity and the seriousness of the conduct that took place. But I still, impeachment is a different area than criminal law. And again, I said this last time I was on your program as well. It's America is obsessed with criminality. Is it a crime or is it not? And that is not the only standard that the various legal systems in America play. You can get kicked out of a book club or a yoga class for misbehaving. It's not that everything.
This is a pink slip. If he were still president, this is whether he keeps his job. And he's getting a lot more due process than any of us had.
And on the due process point, he was asked to testify. So they made the argument in their brief today that the president, he's been given less due process than any other American would have been given. Well, he had an opportunity to testify and chose not to do so. So the due process argument is very much a red herring.
So yeah, I agree with you completely. So and I, just in terms of your points as far as the trauma, that does go to the second prong, which is likelihood of inciting violence.
Right.
And we also have, in terms of intent, we have the hang Mike Pence chant, and then the anti-Mike Pence tweet, knowing they're looking to hang the Vice President of the United States, and then Donald Trump sends out a tweet after that saying he's a coward. I mean, that's
during the event. During the event,
that does get to intent. But this is, we're saying the same thing in a way, and I guess what I wonder though is, you get asked all the time. I know you've been doing a lot of media as I've had. Is there any way to get the 17 Republicans to come over? And is there any way to change anybody's mind? And if that's the case, why are we even in doing that? And maybe I'm a little bit naive given what happened in Watergate, where there were minds changed once the public minds changed a little bit. And if there's, kind of running through the trial so quickly, which I know is going to happen, I presume, if you were to try this in a criminal context, this would take weeks, if not months, to do this very thorough trial. Is there a risk that, everyone's just going to shrug this off and then impeachment becomes a dead letter? I mean, as constitutionally, I'm just worried about that. I don't know if there's any way to save that.
Yeah. I mean, what I would say is, constitutionally, that's a fair point. Politically and historically, what you now have are 50 Republicans or 45 Republican senators who are going to be on the record choosing Donald Trump over the Constitution and the Union. That's what this comes down to. And this is where, sort of like you said earlier in the program, there's this place where a legal proceeding bleeds into a political one. And there will be political consequences to everyone for attaching themselves to Donald Trump. Now, are they going to lose their offices? Probably not. I mean, is Marco Rubio going to lose when he runs in 2 years? Probably not. But this is something that ought to be a stain on his record. But it's hard to compare this to 1974, where it's a different media climate, it's a different fundraising environment, where senators and members of Congress just have different impulses today, and it's hard to see how. And if you look at the president, still holds tremendous sway. The former president still holds tremendous sway over elected Republicans in the country. So I think it's hard to see how they get to 17, particularly given that we already know what the evidence is going to be. And in fact, one more thing, courts, as you know, love dismissing matters on sort of technical things. I mean, that's a weird thing to say, but not having to reach the merits of the case. I remember when I was clerking down in Florida, my judge said he knew of a judge once who would buy a law clerk lunch anytime they could figure out a way to dismiss a case on a matter of procedure, as opposed to having to reach, because they just want to, if they can avoid it, they can. The current Supreme Court, John Roberts, likes doing this a lot too. If we don't have to reach the facts of the case, let's figure out a way we can avoid doing that. And that's kind of what they're doing with this constitutional question, the Republican senators. They're simply having to avoid going on the record saying whether they support Donald Trump's conduct or not. And an easy way to do that is to say, well, we just think this whole proceeding is a sham, and we don't, we find it unconstitutional. So that was a political strategy as much as a legal one.
Yeah, so when we're going to hear, it sounds like, argument about that issue, is it unconstitutional to try anybody after they leave office, even if the impeachment itself, the charging document, happened beforehand? And then we're going to see, we'll see another vote on that. We already know what happened with the pre-trial motion attempt to dismiss the impeachment article, which again is like a really more like a civil complaint than an indictment. I think it's more just it's a charging document. And then, but they are going to have to vote, Elliot, right? Once that's resolved, we'll have that legal question out. And I assume you and I both agree with most legal experts that it's not a strong argument that it's unconstitutional. You probably shouldn't then just resign and avoid a trial. And
it's quick point. The most powerful, both rhetorical and legal point in the Democrats' briefs is this concept of the January exception to the Constitution. They make it up. They say that there is not a January exception where in the final month of a presidency, a president gets carte blanche to engage in whatever he wants because he's just out the door anyway and you can't impeach him. It's a great way to get folks who aren't lawyers to get their heads around this, which is that, wait a second, are you really saying that anytime a president engages in misconduct at the end of his term, that he can't be held accountable for it? Number one. Number two, he was impeached while he was still president, and it was a political matter, either by Republicans or Democrats in the Senate, but it was a political choice not to bring the removal proceedings while he was still president. That doesn't mean that you can never have a Senate trial. It just simply, could happen after the individual's out of office. And that's also confirmed by the use of the term disqualify, as you know, in that provision of the Constitution, that you can't disqualify someone from running for future office if they still hold the office. So it presumes that someone would have been out of office anyway. So there's like you said, it's just, it's a nonsense argument. Yeah.
And when of course, the first round, the first impeachment, the argument was we have to wait for an election. Right. So it's kind of heads we win, tails you lose. You can't impeach a president before an election because there's an election coming, and that would be unconstitutional because you're taking the choice away from the voters. But then when the voters choose, if the president tries to take the voters' choice away, it's after the election and they're leaving, so you can't impeach there either. Actually, according to the Republicans, it would seem to me the only time you could actually impeach for insurrection is if Donald Trump managed to stay in office and succeed in the insurrection, and then maybe they could try him, I guess.
Let's just put this in non-legal terms. What is the standard for conduct for a president of the United States? And let's put it this way, if the four instances of conduct that the president could have been criminally charged with by the special counsel a year and a half ago were not sufficient to impeach the president, okay, fine. All right, let's set that aside. If this allegation of incitement of insurrection is not sufficient to impeach, although he's been impeached, and then disqualify a future president, what could possibly be. And how is this not, this gets back to your area of the history and the Constitution, how is this not a green light to every president from hereafter to engage in whatever conduct they want? It would be irrational for Joe Biden not to break the law and not to, start phoning up dictators in foreign countries and not inciting acts of insurrection because, well, it works. It's easy and you're going to get away with it. So this whole idea of now we're going to start opening up partisan impeachments, and that every time there's divided government, the president's going to be impeached, that's just not accurate. Barack Obama spent 6 of his 8 years in office with with a Republican Congress. And they impeach him, and they had ample opportunities to do so. So this whole idea, in a highly polarized partisan climate, so this whole idea that now every president's going to be impeached because Donald Trump was twice is just nonsense.
So we're going to have this vote on this threshold procedural legal argument, right. And then we're going to hear the facts, right? You talked about the merits. That's a legal term for basically right. What I tell my students, it's the once upon a time there was story. It's the actual story, right? The once upon a time. So having read the briefs for the House impeachment matters, can you just tell our viewers what's the once upon a time they're going to see once we get over this, which I think is this very frivolous argument that the Constitution somehow is being violated here? What's the story we're going to hear?
Yeah, so it's interesting. So let's start with the president's response, which we saw today, which is they fixate on the use of the term, is it force or fight? Pardon me, fight. They fixate on the use of the term fight. Right? There's an entire section on the president's use of the term fight, meaning that it's a colloquial term, and we talk about fighting all the time and so on. My point being is that the president focuses on just the language that was used in the January 6th speech that he gives. And frankly, if you read the president's briefs, they make it sound like that speech was Lincoln's second inaugural address. Literally, there was this lofty, soaring rhetoric, and there was no incitement, no misconduct whatsoever. What the Democrats have done quite effectively is paint a picture of months leading up to, at a minimum, weeks leading up to January 6th, where the president, on a number of instances, leans on state election officials, members of Congress, his own vice president, publicly and privately, about undermining the results of the election. So the Democratic case will be, this isn't just about one day, this is weeks and weeks and weeks of misconduct. And then look at what happened. Like, so when a president spends 6 months undermining the result of an election and then 5 weeks telling people to show up to a rally and fight like your republic depends on it, and we're going to now walk down to the Capitol. Yes, we can bicker or quibble about what the dictionary definition of the term fight is, but what you have is an entire pattern of misconduct, and they quite effectively make that case in their brief. Their briefs are quite good, regardless of, and if you just look at these two documents side by side, there's just a different level of legal tech, I don't even know what you want to call it, skill, and they're just better documents. It's
accuracy is helpful when you accuracy is helpful for lawyers. Last question.
Yeah, go ahead. No, I'm just gonna say I don't mean to be catty, but literally there's a line on the first page of the Republicans' brief that says that this impeachment was rushed and sloppy. That has a typo in it. Like, so you're criticizing someone being rushed and sloppy.
I mean, I tell my students, I mean, and you understand this, especially having been in government, typos are just no. Sometimes it happens, but I had a judge once come talk to my students, appellate judge, it was a state court judge, who said, when I see a typo in a document that's filed, I want to throw it in the trash.
But again, this is in a sentence calling the opponents sloppy and reckless. I mean,
they're just getting their drapery check, and they know as you indicate, they're probably going to win. But I just want to end on this. The one thing that frankly has troubled me about their defense, and I wonder if there's any political backlash from what you think, having been on the Hill, is this idea that, okay, the over 100 people that are now been arrested, and many of whom could go to jail and lose their liberty by virtue of following Donald Trump's, suggestions that they come, and march, that they were acting on their own, that they're terrible, they're criminals, what they did was awful. President Trump has no control over those, those rioters who who acted, when everything went amok, nothing to do with Donald Trump, sort of left them twisting in the wind.
Right.
Where again, he can't go to jail through an impeachment. They can, and some of them are in jail as we speak, waiting for their criminal process. I mean, what did you think about that? Did that strike you?
Yeah, it did. And the irony that I heard Senator Lindsey Graham, Republican senator from South Carolina today, specifically saying was, oh, come on, let's not impeach the president. If you really think this is that bad, try him with a crime and prosecute him, which they are doing everything to get out of having to cast the vote. But no, it's unfortunate that these individuals followed what they thought was their standard bearer. Our president wants us here. We're here at the behest of the president, and are now going to go to jail, and he may not. And his allies in Congress are ensuring that he's not held accountable for it. But I don't want to look. This is a legal show. You and I are legal analysts. I don't want to get too much into the politics and so on. But this is the essence of the last 4 years, which is Donald Trump escaping meaningful accountability for his conduct. And this is the clearest example of it, where people really felt like lemmings being led into the ocean. Not a legal argument, but like lemmings being led into the ocean. They followed this individual to their great detriment, and now here we are.
Right, and we have 5 individuals dead. We have the Capitol defaced. We have people traumatized by that. The staffers and people in the Capitol, the members of the United States Congress that were traumatized, and now we have even Trump supporters, his followers, who are going to, some of them potentially probably lose their liberty as a result. And the one man who the Republican Party is supporting is somehow, I wash my hands of all of it.
It's remarkable.
It's amazing times. Elliot, thank you so much. It's always such a pleasure.
Yeah, always. Great talking.
Okay. Well, this is Civil Politics with Kim Wehle. Thanks everyone for watching. And again, thanks to Elliot Williams for joining me tonight.